I've had this Parkside grinder for a few years now and it's been a very useful tool. It's been more capable than I was expecting for a battery grinder. But a few weeks ago it stopped working, and rather than throw it in the bin, I thought I'd see if I could mend it, which is why I'm making this quick video. I've released the screws so as you don't have to watch me unscrewing those, and it comes apart. First the end gear comes off, then the clamshell casing, comes apart, exposing the motor and miniature controller. First of all, the first thing I notice is it's covered in grinding dust, which for me is steel dust, which is a bit of a concern. But the main thing is when I first took it apart, and I've thrown it all away, is the brushes for the motor had completely self-destructed and were simply absent, with the spring of the brush pushing up against the commutator, which is no good, and obviously that was what the funny noise was and the cause of failure. I've spent, as a result of that, a few hours on the internet, and in particular AliExpress, because places like eBay and AliExpress have very detailed photos of component items, often with measurements on them and identifying features. And I was able to measure the motor, both the length, which is approximately 73 millimeters, and the width, which is approximately 50. And as a result of that, I've managed to identify the motor as being a 895 brushed motor, which yields many responses. And you can also, for just a few pounds, buy a replacement brush set for it, which is what I've done, and they've arrived today, and I'm going to see if I can fit them, record the adventure, and see if that's any use to anyone else, because checking online forums and stuff while trying to identify the motor, I found out that a great many of these Parkside grinders fail with this particular fault. So the next stage is to remove the motor, remove the end cap from the motor, which would mean probably chiseling back these little indents to slide it out, examining it, and sliding the motor back in, sorry, the brush end back in. So that's what I'll do next, and I won't video everything because I want this to be a short video. So using a hammer and various punches and chisels proved quite unsuccessful, so in the end I used I was going to say a Dremel, but I used the actual Black & Decker Wizard, an original alternative, which proved far better at taking the little punched parts out. And I'm just now trying to lever the motor end out. To hopefully reveal the brushes. And there we are. The brushes here are quite mangled, and there was the last bit that fell out there. So that's the old brush, and then the new one I kind of identified using just time and effort. I just trawled through the AliExpress listings until I found something that looked similar, and then looked for motor brush kits, and then found diagrams of motors with dimensions on. And then once I found the dimensions, I could hone in on the right part. And if my video editing skills are right, there'll be some words and diagrams on the screen to help you find one of these. I won't put a link up because the internet being what it is, the link will die So I'll put a description of the motor type and keywords for the motor brushes, and that does look like a suitable replacement. Oh look, there's even a red mark depicting positive, and believe it or not, even though I didn't notice myself, there's a red mark, probably not going to focus, right there on the housing, but now that I'm looking at it in detail, there's like a cancellation on this lug here, and if I turn it round it's just a flat end, so it only goes in one way. The rest of the motor is dirty but fairly serviceable. The brushes could do with a clean. So I've cut some sponge off, or some abrasive off the end of a kitchen sponge to try and clean up the brushes by simply pinching it on and then twisting it with my fingers. Not perfect, but it's a lot better. It is only a grinder, so that's as far as I'm going to go. I'm going to try and insert the brushes. Probably an easier way of doing this, but that fits perfectly. So my identifying skills seem to have paid off. Then that goes that way round. Tap with a hammer. And that seems to be together again. Before I crimp the ends over, which I will do with a hammer and a chisel in a moment, I'm going to see if I can get my power supply to give it some 12 volts. Power supply set to 12 volts at 10 amps. That's the positive on the one with the red dot, and the negative, and nothing's happened. If I turn my power supply on, there we go, switch the output on. Well, that seems to be quite a success. I'm using a small hammer because I don't want to splat the whole thing to death. Maybe that's going to be a mistake. Maybe I will need a bigger hammer. Maybe I'll go out to the shed with the anvil. Let's give it a couple more whacks. This chisel has a blunter end. The other chisel's just cutting through. So trying to just fold a bit of the motor casing over with a hammer and chisel was taking a lot more force than I was expecting to use, and I was worried about damaging the motor, and whether or not it's focused I don't know, but what I did in the end was to Dremel 2 little cuts either side, and then that generated a tab, and the tab folded over really easily. So that's what I've done to retain the top motor plate, end motor plate, is to cut into the side casing 2 little slots and then fold it over, and that's proved quite successful. So I'm going to repeat that on 4 occasions and then get back to putting the motor back into the case. So with the motor reassembled, I'm going to put it back into the casing and see if it does the job. So I've pre-tinned the motor terminal. Got my larger bit on my TS100 and set the temperature quite high because there's a lot of it's a fairly large connector, so you need more heat to solder it. So that's the motor soldered back in the same orientation because it has these locating tabs, and the wires are sort of pre-bent to fit. I've hoovered everything out. It was full of metal grinding dust, including the inside of the motor. That's all been cleaned. So that feels like it's in its correct place. Get the casing together. Let's get it. The screws all look the same, but they're not. There's big screws and little screws, and as I took it apart I noticed the bigger ones were around holding the gear on the end, and the smaller ones held the casing together. Two of the larger screws. For the sake of a short video, I'll put the rest of the screws in after testing it and seeing if it's a success first. So I put a battery on that appears to be fully charged, and I now have an operational angle grinder again. I forget the exact price of the new brush. It was something like £2.50, so I got 3 of them. Not that I'm expecting the others to fail quite so quickly, but I like to spend more on the product than the postage, and that's maybe a bit of OCD, but I have these, and if I know anyone else who's got a broken Parkside, I might be able to help them out. So that's it, how to replace your Parkside brushes and restore your grinder into use.